Have you ever been turned into a punchline by the very people you fed, clothed, and defended? They called me the old lady. They toasted with champagne while my phone filled with bank alerts, tickets, resorts, designer bags. But when their plane touched down, the handcuffs clicked louder than any of their laughs. Hi, I'm Eleanor Grant. I'm 74, and I used to believe love meant softening every blow and covering every bill. I baked holiday pies, babysat for free, and gave my son a credit card for emergencies. For years, nothing happened until one photo and one cruel caption shattered the spell. Tonight, I'm not here to beg for sympathy. I'm here to tell you how a folder of screenshots, a stack of bank statements, and a very steady cup of tea turned humiliation into justice. I want to show you the difference between respect and trust, and what dignity looks like when you decide to stop apologizing for having it. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing the cities and countries scroll by because betrayal doesn't need a map, does it? If you've ever felt like your kindness was mistaken for weakness, this is your story too. Stay with me. By the end, you'll know exactly what I did, why I did it, and how you can protect yourself without losing your heart. Let's start with the post that broke the spell. It started with a knock on my front door, and Martha Collins standing there with that careful little smile people wear when they're about to hand you bad news. "Eleanor," she said, holding out her phone, "I thought you should see this before it gets around." Ian. On the screen was a photo of my son, Michael Grant, and his wife Vanessa boarding a plane, flutes of champagne catching the light. The caption read, "Finally, a trip without the old lady." I chuckled at first the way you laugh when you hope it's a joke, but then my kitchen table began to buzz. One alert, then another, then a whole string of them marching across the screen like ants. Purchase approved, $2,418.63. Sunrise Airlines, $1,089.90. Harbor and Hearth Steakhouse, $3,752. Seabreeze Cove Resort. Numbers stacked on numbers until my breath got shallow. I told myself there had to be a mistake, some glitch, some mix-up. So I opened my banking app right there by the window with the geraniums. Everything was time-stamped. 6:12 a.m., 2 first-class tickets. 8:03 the resort deposit. 1:27 p.m., a boutique I'd never heard of. Mariners Lane, $846.72. Itemized later as linen resort wear. At 7:41 p.m., a photo popped up on Vanessa's page of lobster tails and tiny gold-rimmed plates. 5 minutes later, my phone chimed. Harbor and Hearth, $1,089.90. Their smiles lined up perfectly with my money leaving. Martha sat with me at the table. I remember the way the sunlight hit the lace runner, how ordinary the afternoon looked while my whole world tilted. I kept thinking about little things. The time I covered Michael's overdue car insurance, the weekends I watched their kids so they could have a break. I had given Michael limited access to a card years ago for emergencies. Do you know how many times we used it for an actual emergency? Not many. Do you know how fast it turns into a habit for convenience? Faster than you think. What stung most wasn't the dollars, though there were too many of those to count without a pencil. It was the comments under the photo. Someone wrote, "Must be nice to have a generous mill." And Vanessa replied with a winking face, "She's too busy counting pennies to notice." That's when my ears went warm and my hands went cold. I printed the posts. I printed the alerts. I set them side by side like puzzle pieces that could only make one picture. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. That night I didn't sleep much. I made tea I forgot to drink, and I spread the pages across the table in tidy rows, charges here, photos there, notes in blue pen. Matches 7:41, PM 2 tickets, not authorized. By dawn, the shock had cooled into something steadier. You know that feeling when you stop asking, why would they, and start asking, what do I do next? That's where I landed, right between a broken heart and a clear head, because love had opened the door, and a loophole had walked through it. And that, my dear, is where the real story begins, how a mother's kindness became a key someone kept using, and how I learned the difference between respecting family and trusting them. Now, let me tell you how love left unguarded can turn into a loophole. I still remember the day I handed Michael that credit card. It was a spring afternoon, the kind where the air smells faintly of lilacs and new beginnings. He had come by the house looking tired, holding a stack of bills in one hand and his pride in the other. "Mom," he'd said, "it's just for emergencies if the car breaks down or the kids get sick. It's not de filt." And what mother says no to that? I didn't hesitate. I wanted him to know he could always come to me, that he didn't have to face the world alone. I slipped the card into an envelope, wrote "for emergencies only" on the front, and tucked it into his hand like I was passing down a safety net. For years it sat quietly. Maybe a gas fill up here, a small grocery charge there. I never minded. That's what mothers do, we patch the holes so our children don't fall through. But somewhere along the line, that patch became a doorway. See, love is funny that way. When you give too freely without boundaries, people stop seeing it as love. They start seeing it as access. What began as compassion turned into entitlement. Michael and Vanessa got used to the safety of knowing I'd always step in, always forgive, always smooth things over. "Mom's got it," became their silent motto. I think back to all the times I said yes when I should have said, "not this time." Like when Michael wanted to borrow money for a business idea that somehow never became a business, or when Vanessa hinted that the kids needed something special for Christmas and something special turned into a $1,000 tablet. Each time, I told myself it was just helping. Each time I chipped away a little piece of my own boundary. My late husband Thomas used to say, "Respect and trust aren't twins, Ellie. One can live without the other." I used to argue, "But you can't love without trust." And he'd smile, that quiet smile that meant he saw further down the road than I did. Now I understand what he meant. Respect is about how people treat you. Trust is what you hand them in return. I respected my son, and I trusted him with my card, my finances, my faith. But he and Vanessa? They stopped respecting me the moment they decided that love was permission. Sometimes, the hardest thing about getting older isn't losing strength. It's realizing where you gave too much of it away. Love shouldn't be a loophole people crawl through to escape accountability. It should be a bridge that both sides build and maintain together. That night, as I sat staring at those statements and screenshots, I could hear Thomas's words echoing again, steady and clear. Don't confuse respect with trust. And I decided I wouldn't not anymore. Because love had been my reason for silence, but now it would become my reason for action. And that's where everything changed, where shame turned into strategy. That night, after I realized what Michael and Vanessa had done, shame sat with me at the kitchen table like an uninvited guest. It was quiet at first, just that heavy silence that follows betrayal. Then came the whispering thoughts. How could I not see it? How could my own son do this? I must have read those bank statements a dozen times, hoping the numbers might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. But they didn't. Around midnight, I got up, turned on the small lamp above the sink, and laid everything out my phone, the printouts of their social media posts, the credit card alerts. I lined them up neatly, one by one, the way I used to line up my students' homework when I was still teaching. It gave me something to hold on to, a bit of order in the middle of chaos. I wasn't angry yet. I was just tired of being the one who always understood, always forgave, always cleaned up after someone else's mess. So, instead of crying, I reached for a pen, a simple blue pen. I started circling dates, underlining transactions, making notes in the margins. Matches 7:41 p.m. photo, 2 tickets, first class, unauthorized. That's when I realized something. Shame keeps you still. Strategy moves you forward. I began to think like my husband Thomas would have, calm, steady, precise. If this was going to be fixed, it wouldn't be with tears, it would be with facts. I opened a new folder, an old manila one from the filing cabinet, and labeled it carefully, Unauthorized Transactions. Then I printed screenshots, taped receipts, even wrote down the comments from Vanessa's posts, the ones mocking me. Every piece of evidence went in that folder until it grew thick enough to feel like armor. For the first time in days, I felt a little stronger. I was still hurt, but I wasn't helpless anymore. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by paper and truth, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them in anger, and I wouldn't let them twist my words. I would go through the proper channels: the bank, the law, the steps that turn pain into protection. When I finally went to bed, I looked out the window and saw the first hint of dawn. The sky was pale, soft pink against the horizon. It reminded me that even the longest night ends with a bit of light. Because that's what this was, my dawn. The moment I stopped asking, why me, and started saying, here's what comes next. That's in is the pernick to leaving on the first task 2 euro setted, and way moan rider of the Lingley favel writin' impossible. And what came next was a line I never thought I'd have to draw with the bank, with the police, and with my own child. The morning after that sleepless night, I sat at my kitchen table with that thick folder in front of me, the one now filled with every receipt, every screenshot, every cruel little caption. My hands were trembling, not from age this time, but from determination. I'd spent my whole life fixing things quietly, smoothing things over for the sake of family. But this wasn't something a mother's hug or an apology could patch. This was theft, plain and simple. I called the customer service number on the back of my card. After what felt like an eternity of hold music, a woman named Denise answered. Her voice was calm and professional, the kind of tone that makes you feel both safe and small at once. I explained everything: the unauthorized charges, the travel abroad, the fact that the card had been used by someone with my permission years ago, but never for this. She listened carefully, typing as I spoke. When I finished, she paused and said, Mrs. Grant, I'm so sorry this happened to you, but this isn't just a family misunderstanding. What you're describing is fraud. That word fraud sat heavy in the air. It sounded so cold, so final. But deep down, I knew she was right. Denise told me they'd freeze the card immediately, flag the transactions for investigation, and begin the reversal process. She advised me to open a new account, change my online passwords, and file a police report to strengthen my case. Police report? I repeated, my voice catching. Even if it's my own son? There was a long pause. Then she said gently, Yes, ma'am. Especially if it's your own son, you have to protect yourself. After we hung up, I just sat there for a while, staring at the phone. I'd never called the police in my life, not even when teenagers used to egg our mailbox. The idea of involving law enforcement against Michael felt like crossing an invisible line, one I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. But another voice rose in my mind, Thomas's voice again. Respect and trust aren't the same, Ellie. Don't let love make you blind. And so, with a deep breath, I picked up the phone again. I called our local police station. My voice trembled at first as I explained, but the officer on the other end, Detective Harris, was patient. He asked me to come in and bring everything I had. At the station, I wore my neatest cardigan and pressed slacks. Dignity, I've learned, isn't about pretending you're not hurt. It's about showing up steady, even when you are. I laid out the folder on his desk. The statements, the screenshots, the social media posts. He flipped through them slowly, frowning deeper with every page. Finally, he looked up. Mrs. Grant, this is clear evidence of financial fraud. Given the total amount, it qualifies as grand larceny. I remember nodding quietly. My heart hurt, but my hands were steady. Because at that moment, I understood something simple but powerful. Sometimes protecting the people you love means holding them accountable for what they've done. As I left the station, the late afternoon light stretched long across the pavement. I knew life wouldn't be the same after that phone call, but I also knew I'd done the right thing. For once, I wasn't just keeping peace, I was keeping myself. And soon, that decision, that quiet line in the sand, would lead to a moment no mother ever expects to see. Justice waiting at the airport gates. I didn't go to the airport that day. Detective Harris told me I didn't need to, that everything was arranged. The bank had confirmed the fraud, the charges were filed, and the warrants were ready. Michael and Vanessa's plane from Barbados was scheduled to land at 3:40 p.m. on a Saturday. I marked the time on the corner of my kitchen calendar, right between Water the Roses and Call Martha. Funny how life-changing moments can sit so quietly among ordinary tasks. That morning I tried to keep busy. I folded laundry, swept the porch, even baked a small lemon loaf for Martha. But every so often, I'd glance at the clock. 2, 10, 3, 5, 3:42. My heart thudded once, then settled. Somewhere, right about now, their flight was touching down. Detective Harris had described what would happen. The officers would meet them at the gate, identify themselves, and escort them out calmly. I could picture it, though I wasn't sure I wanted to. Michael stepping off the plane, his shirt wrinkled, but that old confidence still there. Vanessa, sunglasses perched high, probably smiling at her reflection in the terminal windows. They'd be expecting to see me, maybe even thinking I'd be waiting with open arms and a forgiving heart. Instead, they saw uniformed officers. Michael Grant? Vanessa Grant? One would say, papers in hand. And then, the confusion, the panic, the slow realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding and it wasn't going away with a quick apology. Later, Detective Harris told me that the whole terminal went quiet. People stopped mid-step. A few even pulled out their phones, recording. The same way Michael and Vanessa had once recorded their champagne toasts and beach sunsets, except now, it wasn't paradise behind them. It was the consequence of every just one more charge they thought I'd never notice. I didn't feel joy when he told me, not even relief exactly, just a deep, steady calm. Because justice doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes, it's just balance being restored quietly, inevitably. That evening, as I watered my roses, Martha stopped by, bringing over the dish towel I'd left at her house. "You all right, Eleanor?" she asked softly. I nodded. "They landed," I said. "And the police were there." She squeezed my hand. "Good for you," she whispered. I looked out at the garden, the roses blooming red and proud under the setting sun, and I thought, this isn't revenge. This is reclaiming the part of me they tried to make small. Because while they were learning that choices have consequences, I was learning something too, that silence can be powerful, and peace doesn't always need an apology to arrive. And yet, as the sun dipped low and the phone began to ring again that night, Michael's name lighting up the screen, I realized the hardest part wasn't over. Justice had been served, yes, but forgiveness, that was a whole different battle waiting on the other side. And that's where the story turned once more, from justice to silence. That night, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. First it was Michael, then Vanessa, then both, back to back, as if taking turns might soften me. I let it buzz until the sound blended into the hum of the refrigerator. Eventually, my answering machine clicked on, and their voices filled the kitchen. "Mom, please," Michael began, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. It wasn't stealing, it was just borrowing. We were going to pay it back." Then Vanessa's voice followed, sharp and frantic. "Eleanor, how could you do this? You embarrassed us in front of everyone. You called the police on your own son. What kind of mother does that?" I stood there in the doorway, arms folded, staring at the phone as their words spilled out. Once upon a time, those words would have shattered me. I would have called back, apologized, tried to fix everything just to make the pain stop. But this time, I didn't. Because I realized something. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, silence is armor. I poured myself a cup of tea, the same way I had every evening for years, and sat by the window. Outside, my garden glowed under the porch light, soft, peaceful, untouched by the chaos of human voices. I thought about all the times I'd rushed to fill silence in my life, thinking that speaking meant caring. But true caring, I was learning, sometimes means not responding. Silence, when chosen with intention, becomes a boundary, a way of saying, "I hear you, but I will not let your guilt rewrite my truth." The next morning, I checked my voicemail again. Same messages, same excuses. So I pressed delete, one by one, not out of anger, but out of peace. Each deleted message felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. Martha stopped by later that afternoon with a basket of muffins. "Have you heard from them?" she asked. I nodded, smiling faintly. "Plenty," I said. "But I'm not answering." She nodded approvingly. "Good," she said. "You've said enough already through your actions." And she was right. Justice had spoken. I didn't need to explain it, defend it, or argue it. My silence was my statement. That week, I started writing small affirmations on sticky notes, just for myself. Silence is strength. Peace is power. Love does not mean access. I stuck them on the fridge, on the bathroom mirror, even inside my wallet. Little reminders that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks, and you get to choose who has the key. Each day grew a little quieter, but not the lonely kind of quiet. This was the kind that feels earned, the kind that wraps around you like a soft blanket after a long storm. And as I watched the sun set behind my roses one evening, I realized I had more than silence now. I had space. Space to breathe, to think, and to decide what came next. Because silence can draw the line, but rebuilding your life, that takes writing a whole new story. And for me, that began with a pen, a will, and a decision to start again. A few nights after the calls stopped, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table again, the same spot where this whole story began. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. I had a cup of chamomile tea by my elbow and my old will spread open in front of me. It had been years since I'd looked at it. The papers were slightly yellowed at the edges, tucked neatly into a blue folder labeled Estate Documents. I remember when Thomas and I first drafted it, long before he passed. We had written it with the purest kind of optimism, believing our family would always take care of what we left behind with love and gratitude. But that night, as I ran my fingers over those fading signatures, I realized something important. What you leave behind shouldn't reward betrayal. It should reflect your values, the lessons you want to live on when you're no longer here to speak them aloud. So I picked up my pen not to erase, but to rewrite. I started with Michael's name. I didn't remove him completely. I couldn't. He was still my son, and a part of me would always love him. But love doesn't mean handing someone another opportunity to hurt you. So instead, I left him a token just enough to remind him that forgiveness had existed once, but not enough to let old habits return. Vanessa's name, however, I crossed out entirely. She had made her choices, and the lessons they carried were hers alone to face. Then I turned to the section about my granddaughter, Emily. Bright, thoughtful Emily, who still called to check on me every Sunday and sent me drawings in the mail. I added a note. To Emily Grant, for the kindness she gives freely, may this gift help her build a life full of compassion and wisdom. After that, I directed a good portion of my estate toward a scholarship fund for local students who, like Michael once was, needed a hand to get started, but this time, it would be for those who valued honesty and effort, not entitlement. And finally, I designated a donation to the community garden project Martha helped run, the one that gave fresh produce to families in need. Thomas and I had spent so many evenings tending our own little patch of earth, believing that what you plant with care will always come back to you. When it was done, I sat back and looked at the pages. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace, like closing a chapter that had been open too long. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Benton, and scheduled an appointment to make everything official. "Good for you, Mrs. Grant," he said when I explained. "It's never too late to write the ending you deserve." That night, as I slid the newly signed documents back into their folder, I realized this wasn't just a legal step, it was emotional closure. I had spent months reacting to what had been taken from me. Now, I was creating what would come next. Because sometimes rewriting your will isn't just about money, it's about rewriting the future, in ink that no one else can alter. And for me, that future wasn't about loss anymore. It was about growth, the kind that comes after the storm. But healing doesn't happen on paper alone. It happens in the quiet spaces after, in the moments when you learn to breathe again, forgive yourself, and find beauty in ordinary days. That's where I found myself next, learning to heal without erasing the past. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't knock on your door and announce itself like bad news does. It comes softly in quiet mornings, in familiar smells, in the rhythm of small things. For me, it began one sunny Tuesday when I realized I'd gone half a day without thinking about what Michael and Vanessa had done. That might sound small, but for someone who had replayed every word, every picture, every receipt for weeks, it was a victory. I started spending more time in my garden. There's something about soil that listens better than people do. My roses had suffered through the same storm that I did, yet somehow they still bloomed. Martha Collins would often join me in the afternoons, bringing lemonade and that gentle humor of hers. She never asked for updates or advice, she just sat beside me while I weeded and watered. Sometimes, silence really is the kindest form of company. In those moments, I began to understand that healing wasn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It was about learning to live alongside it without letting it define me. One afternoon, I found an old photograph of Michael as a boy, missing front teeth, holding a frog he'd caught by the pond. I stared at it for a long time. For the first time since everything happened, I didn't feel anger. Just a quiet sadness, and maybe even a little gratitude that I'd once known that version of him, the innocent one, before the years and choices built walls between us. That's when I realized forgiveness doesn't mean opening the door again. It means setting down the weight so you can keep walking. I started journaling in the evenings, writing short notes to myself. Today I made bread. Today I laughed with Martha. Today I didn't cry. It became a way to mark progress not in leaps, but in small, steady steps. Sometimes I'd hear about Michael and Vanessa through whispers that they were trying to rebuild, that they'd found part-time jobs, that they were paying restitution as part of the case. I didn't wish them harm. I just wished them wisdom, because consequences are only cruel when you refuse to learn from them. In time, the shame I once felt turned into something else: perspective. I understood that protecting yourself doesn't make you cold-hearted, it makes you whole. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the maple tree, I stood in my garden and looked at the roses glowing under the fading light. Their petals were soft, but their stems held thorns delicate and strong all at once. That's what I wanted to be, gentle but not defenseless. Healing didn't erase the past, but it helped me rewrite my relationship with it. I could remember without reliving. I could hope without expecting. I could love without losing myself again. Because healing isn't forgetting what broke you, it's realizing you're still standing in spite of it. And once I understood that, I began to think beyond my own story. I started to wonder how many others were out there, quiet like me, holding their own folders full of betrayal, thinking they were alone. And that's when I decided it was time to share what I'd learned to turn my pain into something useful, a kind of toolkit for anyone who needed to reclaim their dignity, just like I did. After everything that happened, so many people started writing to me, friends from church, neighbors, even strangers online who'd seen my story. They all said the same thing. "Eleanor, I wish I'd known what to do when it happened to me." And that's what made me realize my story isn't just mine. It's a warning, and maybe even a guide. Because betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who know our birthdays and our PIN numbers. So if you're listening to this and something inside you feels uneasy, if you've ever looked at your bank statement and seen a charge that didn't sit right, this part is for you. My little toolkit for protection and peace of mind. The first step is awareness. Go through your bank accounts regularly, not just once a month. I check mine every Sunday morning now, right after watering my garden. I keep a small notebook beside my laptop where I write down anything unusual. Even a $20 charge at a gas station you don't recognize can be a red flag. Second, set boundaries with access. If you've given someone permission to use your card for emergencies, make sure you define what an emergency actually means. Put it in writing if you can, and set spending limits through your bank's app. I learned the hard way that love and access are not the same thing. Third, use your bank's tools. Most banks offer real-time alerts for every transaction. Turn those on. You can even set up daily or weekly summaries so nothing slips past you. And if something doesn't look right, call immediately. Don't wait a day. The sooner you report it, the better your protection. Fourth, protect your identity. After my incident, Detective Harris suggested freezing my credit reports with the major bureaus. It's free, reversible, and it keeps anyone from opening new accounts in your name. You can also use two-factor authentication for online banking. That extra code might seem like a nuisance, but it's a small wall between you and another heartbreak. Fifth, document everything. Print statements, take screenshots, and keep a log of who you speak with at the bank: names, dates, times. When emotions are high, details slip through the cracks, but paperwork doesn't forget. And finally, reach out for support. Fraud doesn't just hurt your wallet, it hurts your spirit. Find someone you trust to talk to, whether it's a friend like my dear Martha Collins, a counselor, or even a support group for financial abuse survivors. You're not weak for needing help. You're strong for choosing it. I know this sounds like a lot, but think of it this way: every small safeguard is a seed you plant for your own peace. You water it with vigilance, and over time, it grows into confidence. And when you've built those protections, you'll find something surprising you. Stop living in fear of who might take advantage of you, and start living in the calm of knowing you've taken care of yourself. Because in the end, dignity isn't just a feeling. It's a practice one you repeat every day in quiet, steady steps. And with that dignity rebuilt, there's only one thing left to do: to reach out, connect, and remind others that their worth isn't defined by what was taken from them, but by what they choose to reclaim. When I first sat down to share this story, I didn't know if anyone would listen. It's not easy to talk about being betrayed by your own family, your own child. There's a kind of silence that comes with that, the kind that makes you feel small, invisible, even foolish. But as the days went by, I realized something. Telling this story isn't about reopening a wound. It's about showing that healing is possible, even after the deepest cut. If you've stayed with me through every part, through the laughter that wasn't kind, through the sleepless nights, through the quiet justice that followed, then maybe you saw a piece of yourself in these moments. Maybe you've trusted too much. Maybe you've been called naive or old-fashioned for believing the best in people. Maybe you've been made to feel like your kindness was a weakness. I want you to know it isn't. Kindness is strength. It's what separates the ones who harm from the ones who heal. But strength also means knowing when to say enough. If you've ever been taken advantage of by a friend, a partner, even family, this is your reminder. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to draw a line. And doing so doesn't make you cold-hearted. It makes you courageous. My name is Eleanor Grant, and I'm 74 years old. They once called me the old lady. But now, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who's lived, who's learned, and who's still standing softer maybe, but stronger too. And now, I want to invite you to stand with me. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Have you faced something like this before? How did you find your strength again? I read every story, every message. You'd be surprised how many hearts are healing quietly, just like mine once did. And if you're watching this thinking, maybe it's time for me to start my own healing, then this, right here, right now, is your sign. You don't have to shout to reclaim your voice. You just have to use it. So share your story. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that age isn't weakness, it's clarity. It's knowing when to stop being the background character in your own life and step forward, even if your hands are shaking. Because dignity doesn't disappear with age. It grows deeper, like roots that hold steady in every storm. And that's the real ending, not revenge, not regret, but respect. For yourself, for your journey, and for the strength it took to keep going. Thank you for listening to my story. I may be Eleanor Grant, 74, a gardener, a mother, a woman who's seen both cruelty and grace, but I promise you this, my story isn't over, and neither is yours. Before I go on, I want to ask something of you. Where are you watching from today? I love picturing the towns, the kitchens, the cozy chairs where people like you sit and hear my story. It makes me feel less alone in all this.